During a routine patrol, Officer Jacob's frustrations and prejudices come to a head when he targets a well-dressed black man, DeAndre Johnson, with unwarranted suspicion. Rookie Officer Lenny is torn between his partner's biased actions and his sense of justice. As Jacob escalates the situation by planting evidence, Lenny stands up to him, leading to a shocking twist. DeAndre is the new head of their precinct. This confrontation marks a pivotal moment in their department. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Officer Jacob and his rookie partner, Lenny, cruised through the city's labyrinthine streets in their patrol car, the air inside the vehicle charged with an unspoken tension. Jacob's frustration was palpable as he launched into a tirade about the recent upheavals in the police department's leadership. The relentless grip he had on the steering wheel turned his knuckles an angry shade of white, betraying his mounting ire. "Can you believe they put one of them in charge?" Jacob spat out, his voice dripping with contempt. "This department's going to hell in a handbasket." Each word was infused with a sense of betrayal and outrage, a reflection of Jacob's disillusionment with the shifts he saw as an erosion of his established order. Lenny, new to the force and still grappling with the complexities of his role, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His brief tenure on the job had already exposed him to Jacob's overtly racist attitudes, which made him deeply uneasy. The weight of Jacob's harsh words and prejudiced outlook pressed heavily on him. "Maybe we should give the new captain a chance," Lenny ventured cautiously, hoping to steer the conversation toward a more hopeful perspective. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the internal conflict he felt as he struggled to reconcile his desire for fairness with the unsettling reality of his partner's views. Jacob's response was immediate and harsh. "You're too naive, kid. They're all the same. Can't trust them." His dismissive tone cut through the air like a blade, leaving no room for disagreement or hope. Jacob's words were laced with a deep-seated cynicism, a reflection of his belief that change was synonymous with degradation and betrayal. As they turned onto Main Street, Jacob's gaze locked onto a sleek black sedan moving with a measured grace down the road. The driver, a well-dressed black man, followed all traffic laws, but Jacob's reaction was immediate and hostile. "Look at that," Jacob muttered with a tone of barely contained disdain. "Bet he stole that car." His words were steeped in prejudice, the mere presence of the black driver triggering a baseless suspicion that Jacob clung to with a sense of grim certainty. Lenny's unease deepened, a gnawing discomfort taking hold. "We don't know that, sir. He's not doing anything wrong," Lenny said, his voice wavering with a mix of trepidation and moral courage. His attempt to interject was overshadowed by the weight of Jacob's authority and the palpable tension in the air. Jacob's decision to flip on the patrol car's lights was a calculated move, one driven by his prejudiced instincts rather than any genuine concern for law enforcement. The black sedan pulled over smoothly, but Lenny could see the driver's body tense up, a visible reaction to the unwarranted intrusion. As Jacob got out of the patrol car, his every movement radiated a sense of entitlement and superiority. Lenny, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach, reluctantly followed, his heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. When the driver's window rolled down, revealing a man whose composure barely masked his wariness, Lenny felt a pang of empathy. The driver's calm, yet guarded demeanor spoke volumes about the anxiety he felt under the scrutiny of the officers. "Is there a problem, officers?" the driver asked, his voice steady but tinged with apprehension. Jacob's response was cold and invasive. He leaned in aggressively, his face inches from the driver's, and demanded license and registration with a tone that conveyed disdain and an unwarranted sense of superiority. The driver complied, his hands trembling slightly as he handed over the documents. Lenny couldn't help but notice the driver's nervousness, a poignant reminder of the unjust fear he was subjected to. Jacob's disdainful reading of the driver's name, DeAndre Johnson, was accompanied by a sneer that betrayed his deep-seated prejudices. "And what brings you to this neighborhood, Mr. Johnson?" he asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. DeAndre's response, "I'm on my way to a meeting," was delivered with a calm resolve, yet it carried an undercurrent of frustration. "Is there a reason you pulled me over?" he inquired, his voice holding a thread of weariness. The exchange was a stark illustration of the power dynamics at play and the sense of helplessness that often accompanies such encounters. Jacob's insistence that DeAndre step out of the vehicle was met with hesitant compliance. DeAndre's slow, deliberate movements were a reflection of his reluctance, and his glance toward Lenny was laden with a silent plea for understanding. Lenny, feeling the weight of his helplessness, could only look away in shame, a silent witness to the unfolding injustice. As Jacob continued his invasive questioning, Lenny's mind raced with a desperate urge to find a way to defuse the situation. The growing tension was palpable, and Lenny knew that this routine traffic stop was teetering on the edge of something far more dangerous and life-altering. The sense of inevitability hung heavily in the air, a stark reminder of the harsh realities faced by those on the receiving end of such prejudice. Jacob circled DeAndre's car with a predatory intensity, his gaze scrutinizing every detail of the sleek vehicle as if searching for a reason to escalate the encounter. The way he moved, meticulously examining the car from every angle, made it clear that he was looking for any excuse to create trouble. "Nice car you've got here, Mr. Johnson," Jacob said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "How does someone like you afford something like this?" DeAndre, struggling to keep his composure, took a slow, deep breath. He was dressed sharply for an important business meeting, and he tried to remain calm despite the escalating tension. "I work hard for my money, officer. I'm on my way to a critical meeting. Could you please tell me why I've been stopped?" Jacob's expression hardened as he ignored DeAndre's question. His hand casually rested on his holster, a clear and unsettling sign of his intentions. "Mind if we take a look inside?" DeAndre's response was firm and resolute. "I do mind. I haven't done anything wrong, and I don't consent to a search." Jacob's face contorted into a scowl, his anger barely contained. "Oh, so you've got something to hide, do you?" Without warning or any pretense, Jacob yanked open the car door and began to rummage through the interior with an air of aggressive entitlement. DeAndre stepped forward to intervene, his voice rising in protest, but Lenny, the rookie officer, quickly placed himself between DeAndre and Jacob. "Sir, please stay back," Lenny said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and authority. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. As Jacob continued his search, his movements were swift and deliberate. He discreetly pulled out a small bag of white powder from his pocket, sliding it under the driver's seat with practiced ease. Lenny caught a glimpse of the maneuver from the corner of his eye, his heart racing as the realization dawned on him. What was happening went beyond racial profiling. It was a deliberate attempt to frame DeAndre. Jacob emerged from the car, holding the bag aloft with a triumphant smirk. Well, what do we have here?" DeAndre's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. "That's not mine. You just planted that." Jacob's smirk widened into a sneer. "Looks like we've got ourselves a drug dealer. You're under arrest." As Jacob reached for his handcuffs, DeAndre's veneer of calm shattered. "This is absurd. I'm telling you, that's not mine." Lenny's stomach churned as he watched the scene unfold. He was witnessing a clear abuse of power, and his father's words echoed ominously in his mind. "A true officer protects and serves all people, son, not just the ones who look like us." The tension in the air was palpable, heavy with the weight of injustice. DeAndre, fully aware of the gravity of the situation, turned his pleading eyes towards Lenny. "Officer, you saw what happened. Tell him this isn't right." Jacob spun around, glaring at Lenny with a mix of irritation and contempt. "Don't listen to him, rookie. This is how we clean up the streets." Lenny stood paralyzed, torn between his duty to his partner and his moral obligation to uphold justice. The pressure of the moment was immense, forcing him to confront a decision that could alter the course of his career and perhaps his entire life. As Jacob moved to handcuff DeAndre, the situation was on the brink of an explosive confrontation. The next few moments would be crucial in determining whether justice would prevail, or if an innocent man's life would be derailed by unchecked prejudice and corruption. The world seemed to slow down for Lenny as he watched Jacob's hand inch toward the handcuffs on his belt. In that suspended moment, a torrent of memories surged through him: his father's proud smile when he graduated from the police academy, the endless stories of integrity and honor that had shaped his upbringing, and the solemn oath he had taken to protect and serve with unwavering commitment. "Stop!" Lenny's voice cut through the tension with an unexpected firmness that even surprised him. Jacob froze, his hand suspended halfway to DeAndre's wrist. He turned his head, a mixture of confusion and annoyance in his eyes. "What did you say, rookie?" Lenny took a deep breath, stepping decisively into the space between his partner and DeAndre. His heart thundered in his chest, but with each beat, his resolve solidified. "I said stop, Officer Jacob. This isn't right, and you know it." Jacob's face twisted into a mask of rage, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "You listen here, you little punk. I've been on this force longer than you've been alive. You don't get to tell me what's right or wrong." "Maybe not," Lenny replied, his voice steady and unwavering as he stood his ground. "But I know what I saw. You planted that evidence. This man is innocent." DeAndre, still visibly tense, observed the unfolding drama with a flicker of hope in his eyes. He remained silent, acutely aware of the gravity of the confrontation. Jacob's voice dropped to a menacing growl, dripping with hostility. "You're making a big mistake, kid. I can end your career right here, right now. Is that what you want?" For a fleeting second, doubt crept into Lenny's mind. His lifelong dream of becoming a cop and making a meaningful difference seemed to hang in the balance. Was he truly prepared to risk it all? But then he looked at DeAndre, seeing the fear and desperation etched on his face, and he realized he couldn't turn back now. "If standing up for what's right means losing my job, then so be it. I won't be part of this," Lenny declared, his voice firm with conviction. Jacob's face flushed with anger, his complexion a deep crimson as he jabbed a finger into Lenny's chest. "You're done, you hear me? Done. I'll make sure you never wear a badge again." Lenny stood unyielding, his voice calm and resolute. "Go ahead, but I'm not moving, and you're not arresting this man on false charges." The air between the two officers crackled with tension. DeAndre, seizing the moment of potential resolution, attempted to de-escalate the situation. "Officers, please, there's no need for this to escalate. We can resolve this peacefully." Jacob spun around, his anger directed at DeAndre. "Shut your mouth. You don't get to talk." But Lenny, having found his courage, placed a firm hand on Jacob's shoulder, gently but firmly pulling him back. "That's enough. He has rights, and you're violating them." The older officer roughly shoved Lenny's hand aside, his face a mask of anger and authority. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life, kid. Don't think I won't report this insubordination," he growled, his voice brimming with menace. Lenny stood his ground, his posture unwavering. He could almost hear his father's stern advice echoing in his mind, reminding him of the value of integrity over fleeting comforts. "Report away," Lenny said firmly, his resolve as solid as steel. "I'd rather lose my job than lose my integrity." Unbeknownst to them, this heated confrontation, charged with defiance and authority, was on the brink of transforming into a significant turning point. The intensity of the moment would soon set off a series of events that would ripple through their police department and the wider community, shaking its very core. The atmosphere around them was electric with tension as Jacob, Lenny, and DeAndre stood locked in their standoff. The once bustling traffic had slowed to a crawl, drivers craning their necks to witness the dramatic scene unfolding on the roadside. Seeing no viable escape from the escalating situation, DeAndre decided to take a bold risk. His voice, though calm, carried an authoritative edge as he addressed the officers. "Officers," he began, "I think there's something you both need to know." Jacob's response was a scornful sneer. "Save it for the judge, pal," he retorted dismissively, his confidence unshaken. But DeAndre pressed on, his tone unyielding. "I am Captain DeAndre Johnson, the new head of your precinct." The revelation hung in the air like a heavy fog, its significance sinking in with each passing second. Jacob's face drained of color, his earlier bravado dissipating into disbelief, while Lenny's eyes widened in astonished shock. That's impossible," Jacob stammered, his previous bravado evaporating into a mix of confusion and fear. DeAndre slowly reached into his jacket, a motion that caused both officers to flinch instinctively. But rather than producing anything threatening, he pulled out his badge and ID. "I was en route to headquarters for a meeting with the commissioner when you pulled me over," he explained, his voice steady and authoritative. Lenny took the badge, scrutinizing it closely under the waning light before passing it to Jacob. The older officer's hands trembled as the gravity of his mistake became painfully clear. Captain Johnson's voice resonated with authority as he continued. "Officer Jacob, you're relieved of duty, effective immediately. I expect you to report to Internal Affairs first thing tomorrow morning." Jacob's expression contorted with a volatile mix of anger and fear, but he was acutely aware that resistance was futile. He gave a curt nod and began to retreat, his shoulders hunched as he slunk back toward the patrol car, his career now precariously hanging by a thread. As Jacob disappeared from view, Lenny turned to Captain Johnson, a mixture of relief and regret in his eyes. "Sir, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice laden with sincere remorse. I didn't know." Captain Johnson scrutinized Lenny with a long, measured gaze, as if weighing the gravity of the situation against the measure of courage it took to confront it. "You stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy," Captain Johnson said with a tone of solemn respect. "That's what matters." The weight of his words was heavy, a beacon of validation amid a turbulent storm. Lenny nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and profound unease. The gravity of the events that had just unfolded left him shaken, yet the acknowledgement from his superior was a small, reassuring beacon amidst the chaos. Captain Johnson gestured toward his car, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to attend. But Officer Lenny, I'll be seeing you at the precinct tomorrow. We have much to discuss." With that, Captain Johnson slid into his vehicle, and Lenny watched him drive away, the enormity of the day's events settling heavily on his shoulders. The future seemed uncertain and laden with both promise and challenge. He was acutely aware that his journey as a police officer had irrevocably changed, marked by a newfound commitment to justice and integrity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city streets, Lenny understood that this was only the beginning of a far more significant struggle for justice. The evening's fading light mirrored his resolve, a dawning determination to fight against systemic injustices, a battle that now felt more personal and imperative than ever before. Meanwhile, the news of the confrontation spread like wildfire. Reporters surged through the crowd, their voices rising in a chaotic din of questions. "Captain Johnson, can you comment on what's happening here?" "Officer, are you being wrongfully arrested?" Is this an instance of racial profiling gone wrong? The urgency in their voices underscored the gravity of the situation. DeAndre, trying to maintain order amidst the swelling chaos, raised his hand to calm the crowd and the press. "Please, everyone, step back. This is an ongoing police matter. We will address all questions in due time." His plea, however, did little to quell the growing unrest. Years of pent-up frustration and anger over police misconduct and systemic bias erupted in a torrent of voices. People began sharing their own harrowing stories of mistreatment, each account amplifying the collective outrage that filled the air. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. If you're against racism and discrimination, show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Urged an activist in the crowd, further fueling the fire of public dissent. Jacob, overwhelmed by the escalating situation, made a frantic bid to retreat to his patrol car. "This is all a misunderstanding," he shouted desperately. "I was just doing my job." His words, however, only served to inflame the crowd further. Chants of "no justice, no peace" began to ripple through the streets, their rhythmic insistence echoing off the buildings and amplifying the sense of impending confrontation. Seeing the situation spiral out of control, Lenny quickly keyed his radio. "Dispatch, we need additional units for crowd control at our location. The situation is tense but currently non-violent." His voice was steady, but the urgency in his command belied the gravity of the situation unfolding before him. DeAndre, grappling with the roles of a father, a police captain, and a black man facing an unjust situation, took a deep, steadying breath. He understood that his next actions would not only influence the immediate response, but would also set the tone for his tenure as captain. As sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the approach of backup, DeAndre braced himself. This incident had transcended a mere traffic stop. It had become a flashpoint, a critical juncture for the community's simmering grievances and the strained relationship between the police and the people they were sworn to protect. The eyes of the city were upon them, and the world was poised to take notice of this pivotal moment. The wail of sirens grew louder, echoing through the streets as police vehicles raced towards the unfolding scene. Realizing the volatile nature of the situation, Lenny sprinted towards the approaching cars, his arms flailing in an attempt to get their attention. "Over here," he shouted, his voice struggling to rise above the cacophony of the crowd's chants and jeers. As the first patrol car came to a screeching halt, its tires skidding against the pavement, 2 officers sprang out, their hands instinctively hovering near their holsters. They surveyed the chaotic scene before them, an angry crowd encircling the area, Jacob backed into a corner, and DeAndre standing resolutely at the center. Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior officer among the newly arrived backup, took in the tumultuous scene with a mixture of confusion and concern. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his authoritative tone cutting through the din. Lenny, breathless and visibly shaken, tried to articulate the gravity of the situation. "Sarge, we've got a serious problem." Officer Jacob conducted an illegal stop and attempted to plant evidence. The man he stopped is Captain Johnson, our new precinct leader. Rodriguez's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. "Are you serious? This is outrageous." Meanwhile, Jacob, sensing that his chance to cover up his actions was slipping away, made a frantic and desperate move. He lunged towards the bag of drugs that had been planted, aiming to destroy the evidence of his wrongdoing. "He's going for the drugs," someone in the crowd shouted urgently. DeAndre, sharp and alert, acted with the precision and speed honed by years of training. He lunged at Jacob, tackling him to the ground and pinning him firmly. "Officer Jacob, you're under arrest," DeAndre declared, his voice ringing out with authority and clarity. "You have the right to remain silent." Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, their tension and anxiety dissipating as they witnessed the turn of events. Sergeant Rodriguez rushed over, his face a mask of determination and concern, to assist with the arrest. Lenny, a wave of relief washing over him, stepped forward to offer his support. As Jacob was handcuffed and led toward a patrol car, he began to shout defensively, "This is a setup. You can't do this to me. I've got rights." DeAndre, maintaining a composed and authoritative demeanor, addressed the gathering crowd and the assembled officers. "Everyone, please remain calm. The situation is now under control. We will be conducting a thorough investigation into today's events, and I assure you that justice will be served." The newly arrived officers, now grappling with the full scope of the incident, began to disperse the crowd, attempting to restore order. News cameras rolled, capturing every dramatic moment of the unfolding drama. As the scene settled into a tense calm, Lenny approached DeAndre, his heart still racing from the adrenaline of the confrontation. "Sir, I want you to know that I'm prepared to give a full statement about what I witnessed today," Lenny declared, his voice unwavering despite the charged atmosphere. DeAndre looked at Lenny with a profound sense of gratitude and respect. "Thank you, Officer Thompson. Your integrity today is exactly what this department needs." As the immediate chaos began to subside, DeAndre's thoughts shifted to his son. He hurried back to his car, his heart pounding with concern. Throwing open the back door, he called out, "Marcus, are you okay?" The young boy nodded, his wide eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Dad, what's going to happen now?" DeAndre pulled his son into a tight embrace, his own emotions raw and tender. "Now we're going to make things right. This is what I've been fighting for, son. This is why my job is so important." As father and son held each other, Sergeant Rodriguez approached, his expression serious. "Captain, the press is asking for a statement, and the commissioner is on his way." DeAndre took a deep breath, bracing himself for the unfolding storm. He understood that the real battle was only beginning. The arrest of Officer Jacob was merely the initial step toward addressing the deeper, systemic issues plaguing the department. Surveying Lenny, his son, and the diverse crowd of onlookers who had gathered, DeAndre squared his shoulders. The path forward would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, there was a glimmer of hope for genuine reform. The reinforcements had arrived, not just in the form of additional officers, but through the awakening of a community that was ready to stand up for justice. The real work was about to commence. As the scene began to stabilize, the tension remained palpable in the air. The commissioner's car pulled up, its emergency lights flashing urgently. Commissioner Holt, a stern-faced man in his 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense leadership, stepped out of the vehicle. His face displayed a blend of concern and irritation as he approached. Captain Johnson Holt called out, his voice sharp and authoritative. "What in God's name is going on here?" DeAndre stood tall, meeting the commissioner's steely gaze with resolve. "Sir, we've had an incident involving Officer Jacob. He conducted an illegal stop and attempted to plant evidence." Holt's eyebrows arched in disbelief. "These are serious accusations, Captain. Do you have proof?" "I do," Lenny replied, stepping forward with unwavering determination. "I witnessed the entire incident, sir. Officer Jacob planted drugs in Captain Johnson's vehicle." The commissioner's gaze darted between DeAndre, Lenny, and the patrol car where Jacob sat, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and fear. "This is a nightmare." Holt muttered under his breath, before raising his voice. "All right, I want statements from everyone involved, and someone get those news cameras out of here." But the urgency was moot. The story was already spreading like wildfire across social media. Smartphones had captured every critical moment, and the spectacle of Jacob being led away from the patrol car was rapidly disseminated to the public. "This is all a misunderstanding," Jacob shouted, his voice cracking as his composure finally unraveled. "You can't seriously believe this rookie and some guy who just showed up claiming to be a captain." DeAndre stepped forward, the sunlight reflecting off his badge and lending it an almost gleaming authority. "I am Captain DeAndre Johnson," he declared firmly. "I was en route to meet with the commissioner when you illegally detained me and attempted to frame me for drug possession." The crowd, which had briefly fallen silent with the arrival of the commissioner, began to stir once more. Whispers turned into louder murmurs, and shouts of justice and lock him up surged through the onlookers, their initial shock now giving way to fervent calls for accountability. Commissioner Holt raised his hands, his commanding presence silencing the crowd with practiced ease. "This situation will be handled according to protocol," he announced. "Officer Jacob, you are suspended pending a full investigation. Captain Johnson, I need a comprehensive report on my desk by tomorrow morning." Jacob's face twisted into a mask of rage and disbelief. "This is how you're going to do me, Holt? After all these years? You know how things work on the streets. Sometimes you gotta bend the rules to get results." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, the confession leaving even the most vocal supporters of Jacob stunned. The gravity of Jacob's admission of rule bending was palpable in the sudden hush that followed. DeAndre stepped closer to Jacob, his voice low but resolute, cutting through the silence. "The rules aren't meant to be bent," Jacob DeAndre said, his tone steady and unwavering. "They're meant to protect everyone, including the officers who uphold them. Your actions today, and apparently for years prior, have not only violated the law but have eroded the trust between the police and the community we're sworn to protect." Lenny, now galvanized by DeAndre's unwavering stance, took a step forward. "Sir," he addressed the commissioner with newfound resolve, "I'm prepared to give a full statement about today's events and about other incidents I've witnessed during my time with Officer Jacob." Jacob's face turned an alarming shade of purple as he lunged at Lenny, his rage palpable and uncontrollable. "You little rat, I'll end you," he roared, his voice filled with venom. Several officers sprang into action, rushing to restrain Jacob as he continued to hurl threats and obscenities, his fury evident in every shout. Commissioner Holt, his face grim and resolute, nodded to the officers. "Get him out of here," he ordered, "and ensure he's charged with attempting to assault an officer on top of everything else." The officers worked swiftly to escort Jacob away, his angry protests growing fainter as he was led out of sight. The crowd, still buzzing with the shock of the day's events, watched as the scene unfolded, the promise of justice beginning to take shape in the wake of the confrontation. As Jacob was led away, his protests echoing through the air, DeAndre turned to face the crowd that had gathered in a mix of anger and disillusionment. The faces before him reflected a deep-seated frustration with law enforcement, a sentiment that had been simmering for too long. With a steady gaze and a voice filled with resolve, he addressed the onlookers. "If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. I understand that many of you have lost faith in law enforcement," DeAndre began, his tone sincere and unwavering. "What transpired here today is utterly unacceptable, and I want to assure you that we are committed to making things right. Under my leadership, we will confront and eradicate corruption, address and rectify racial bias, and work relentlessly to rebuild the trust that has been so severely damaged." As DeAndre spoke, the crowd's collective anger began to shift. The harsh shouts that had filled the air gradually gave way to hesitant applause. It was not a resounding endorsement, but it signaled a beginning, a flicker of hope amid the lingering skepticism. The crowd began to disperse, their movements slow and thoughtful. Amid the crowd, DeAndre's gaze met Lenny's. The young officer, standing with a mixture of exhaustion and pride, felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path forward would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges, but today change was not only necessary but possible, and it started with standing up for what was right. As the final onlookers and reporters were ushered away, DeAndre's thoughts turned to the monumental task that lay ahead. The confrontation was over, but the real work of reforming the department had only just begun. DeAndre was acutely aware that he could not achieve this transformation alone. The road to rebuilding trust and integrity within the department required the support and collaboration of both allies within the force and members of the community. Feeling a cautious optimism, DeAndre turned to Lenny and extended a firm handshake. "Let's get started," he said, his voice resolute. "This is just the beginning," DeAndre continued, his tone steady and determined. "We have a long journey ahead to restore trust and ensure that the injustices we witnessed with Officer Jacob are never repeated." He looked at Lenny, who stood nearby, still processing the weight of the day's events. Officers like Lenny Thompson, who dared to stand up for what is right, represent the future of our department. Moving forward, we will cultivate a culture of accountability and integrity, DeAndre said, his gaze meeting Lenny's with an expression of mutual understanding. As the last remnants of the crowd slowly faded, a mix of hope and skepticism lingered in the air. The fall of Jacob was a significant victory, yet it unveiled deep-seated issues that would require time and effort to address. DeAndre and Lenny exchanged a meaningful look, both acutely aware that the real work was just beginning. The department needed a comprehensive overhaul, and they were resolute in their commitment to see it through. As they walked back to their patrol car, DeAndre placed a reassuring hand on Lenny's shoulder. "You did well, Thompson. Your father would be proud," he said, his voice carrying a note of personal encouragement. Lenny nodded, a small, grateful smile forming on his lips. For the first time since joining the force, he felt a genuine connection to the ideals that had initially inspired him to become a police officer. The fall of Jacob marked not just the end of a troubling chapter, but the beginning of a new era. The road ahead would be challenging and filled with obstacles, but with leaders like DeAndre and dedicated officers like Lenny, there was a tangible hope for meaningful, lasting change. In the weeks that followed Jacob's conviction, the transformation of the police department became evident. Captain DeAndre Johnson, now firmly entrenched in his role, embarked on a mission to implement sweeping reforms. The precinct buzzed with renewed energy as DeAndre called for an all-hands meeting. Officers entered the briefing room, their expressions a blend of anticipation and apprehension as they prepared to hear what lay ahead. Standing at the front of the room with Lenny by his side, DeAndre addressed his fellow officers with a voice that carried both authority and warmth. "Officers," he began, his presence commanding attention, "we stand at a crucial crossroads. The events of the past few weeks have shaken our department to its very foundation. Yet, from this crisis emerges an opportunity to rebuild, to strive for excellence, and to truly serve and protect every member of our community with integrity and dedication." The path forward was daunting, but with a unified vision and unwavering commitment, DeAndre and his team were ready to embrace the challenge and lead their department toward a future defined by trust and respect. DeAndre laid out his comprehensive plan with unwavering resolve. He proposed mandatory bias training for all officers, the establishment of a civilian oversight committee, the implementation of body cameras for every patrol officer, and a strict zero-tolerance policy for any form of discriminatory behavior. As he spoke, a noticeable shift occurred in the room. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsettled by the changes, while others nodded in approval, showing their support for the reforms. "I understand that change can be challenging," DeAndre acknowledged with a firm yet empathetic tone, "but it is necessary. We owe it to ourselves and to the community we serve to make these changes. Our duty is not just to enforce the law, but to ensure that we are doing so with fairness and respect for everyone." As the meeting drew to a close, Lenny found himself at the center of attention. Surrounded by his fellow officers, he was met with a mix of reactions. Some congratulated him on his courageous stance and the difficult discussions he had navigated, while others sought his advice on how to adapt to the evolving dynamics within the department. The atmosphere outside the meeting room mirrored the complexity of the moment. While some in the community felt a cautious optimism, there was a palpable sense of anticipation and uncertainty about what lay ahead. Determined to bridge the gap between the police and the community, DeAndre made it a priority to engage with the public in various settings. He attended town halls, participated in community events, and even showed up at local basketball games, all to rebuild the trust that had been fractured. One evening, as Lenny was concluding his patrol shift, he noticed a familiar face, DeAndre's son Marcus, playing basketball at a nearby park. With a sense of camaraderie, Lenny decided to pull over and join in. "Hey Marcus," Lenny called out with a friendly wave. "Mind if I jump in and play a few rounds?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, glancing at the police officer before nodding in agreement. As they played, more neighborhood kids gathered, and soon the game transformed into a lively, full-court match with laughter and cheers echoing throughout the park. The atmosphere was joyful and carefree, a stark contrast to the tensions that had previously dominated the community. When DeAndre arrived to pick up Marcus, he couldn't help but smile at the heartwarming scene. He joined the game, his professional facade momentarily set aside, as he reveled in the simple pleasure of playing basketball with the local kids and Lenny. For a brief period, the weight of his responsibilities seemed to lift, replaced by the genuine connections he was forging within the community. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the park, DeAndre gathered everyone around. With a heartfelt gesture towards the diverse group of children and adults gathered, he addressed them. "This," he said, "encompassing the spirit of the gathering, is what community policing is all about. It's not just about patrolling the neighborhood, it's about becoming a part of it. Building relationships, understanding each other, and working together." Lenny, watching the scene unfold, felt a profound realization dawning upon him. This was the essence of why he had chosen to become a police officer, not merely to enforce laws, but to actively contribute to the well-being and unity of his community. In the months that followed, the effects of these changes began to manifest. Crime rates gradually decreased, and perhaps more significantly, there was a noticeable increase in community satisfaction with the police force. While challenges and setbacks remained, the progress was undeniable and significant. A year after the pivotal events that had sparked these reforms, DeAndre found himself addressing the graduating class of the police academy. Lenny, now a highly respected officer and mentor to recruits, sat proudly in the front row. "You are stepping into a profession that is both noble and crucial," DeAndre told the new officers with a tone of earnest dedication. "Your role extends beyond enforcing laws. It is about fostering trust, serving with empathy and compassion, and always standing firm for what is right, even when it is difficult." As the new officers received their badges, a palpable sense of hope and renewal filled the room. The department, having undergone a period of intense self-reflection and transformation, was emerging stronger, more transparent, and deeply connected to the community it served. DeAndre and Lenny exchanged a knowing glance, both understanding that while much had been achieved, the journey was far from complete. A new era of policing had begun, one grounded in the principles of integrity, accountability, and genuine community partnership. 2 years had passed since the fateful day of Jacob's arrest. Under DeAndre's leadership, and with officers like Lenny upholding the new standards, the police department had made considerable progress in reforming its practices and mending its relationship with the community. Nevertheless, the shadow of the past still loomed large, particularly as Jacob's appeal hearing drew near, a reminder that the path to meaningful change was ongoing and filled with challenges. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The courthouse was a hive of activity as the morning sun illuminated a scene of intense public scrutiny and legal drama. Media crews had set up camp outside, their cameras and microphones poised to capture every moment of this high-stakes trial. The street was a battleground of sorts, with supporters of the accused mingling with passionate protesters, each side expressing their fervent opinions with placards, chants, and determined voices. The atmosphere was charged, a palpable tension hanging in the air as the crowd awaited the proceedings. Inside, the mood was starkly different. In the courtroom's gallery, DeAndre and Lenny occupied their seats with an air of solemnity. Their presence was a silent yet powerful testament to the significance of the day's events. DeAndre's eyes were focused, a reflection of the gravity of the moment, while Lenny sat beside him, his expression a mix of resolve and weariness. Both men were there not just for the trial, but for a deeper sense of justice and closure. Jacob, who had spent the past 2 years behind bars, was led into the courtroom with a demeanor that starkly contrasted his once arrogant bearing. His face, now gaunt and lined with the strain of incarceration, betrayed an unmistakable nervousness. The self-assured confidence that had once characterized him was now replaced by a palpable sense of dread as his eyes flitted anxiously around the room, absorbing the weight of the situation. Jacob's lawyer began the defense with a well-rehearsed appeal for leniency. The arguments presented focused on Jacob's long service record, painting him as a product of a flawed system rather than a malevolent actor. The defense counsel argued that the systemic issues had shaped Jacob's actions, suggesting that a reduced sentence would be more fitting given his purported contributions and the overarching failings of the system he had operated within. When it was the prosecution's turn, they approached the task with unflinching determination. "Your Honor." The prosecutor's voice rang out clearly. Mr. Jacob's actions were far from isolated incidents. They were calculated abuses of power that not only disrupted individual lives, but also fundamentally undermined public trust in law enforcement. The prosecutor's words cut through the courtroom, setting the tone for the gravity of the charges Jacob faced. As the hearing progressed, the presentation of evidence began to paint a harrowing picture. Testimonies from individuals who had been directly affected by Jacob's misconduct were particularly striking. Each account revealed the extensive and devastating impact of his actions: families shattered by wrongful arrests, careers ruined by falsified evidence, and an entire community left in fear of those who were meant to protect them. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as the extent of the damage was laid bare. Lenny was called to the stand once more, his voice unwavering as he recounted not only the specific incident involving DeAndre but also other episodes of misconduct he had observed during his tenure as Jacob's partner. His testimony added a layer of credibility and depth to the prosecution's case, illustrating a pattern of abuse rather than isolated acts of misjudgment. When DeAndre took the stand, his testimony was equally compelling. He spoke not just as a victim, but as a leader committed to addressing and rectifying past wrongs within the department. "Your Honor." DeAndre began with a tone of both authority and compassion. The damage inflicted by Mr. Jacob transcends individual cases. It has fostered a pervasive culture of mistrust that we are still grappling with. Our community deserves justice that acknowledges not just one incident, but a series of systemic abuses that have tarnished the very fabric of our law enforcement. As the hearing continued, it became increasingly evident that the case was about more than just Jacob's fate. It symbolized a broader struggle for accountability and a reaffirmation that no one, not even those sworn to uphold the law, was beyond the reach of justice. The proceedings were emblematic of a larger fight against systemic corruption and abuse. When the moment of reckoning arrived, the judge's decision was met with a collective gasp from those present. The judge had reviewed the full scope of the evidence and testimony with great care. Mr. Jacob," she announced, her voice firm and resolute. "Having considered all aspects of this case, I find no justifiable grounds for reducing your sentence, in light of the overwhelming evidence presented. I am imposing an additional 2 years on your original sentence. You will now serve a total of 8 years, with no possibility of parole for the first 5 years." Jacob's reaction was one of resignation. He slumped in his chair, the last remnants of his defiance crumbling as the reality of his extended sentence set in. The atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy with a mix of relief and contemplation. As the proceedings concluded and the crowd outside began to disperse, DeAndre stepped forward to address the media and supporters. "Today, justice has been served," he said, his voice carrying a note of both triumph and continued resolve. "This verdict is not only a victory for me, but for every individual in our community who has suffered as a result of the abuse of power. However, let this also serve as a reminder that our journey is far from over. We must stay vigilant, hold ourselves accountable, and strive for a system that truly serves and protects all people, irrespective of their race or background." Lenny approached DeAndre as the crowd slowly dispersed, a look of cautious optimism on his face. "Do you think this will make a difference, sir?" he asked, his tone reflecting both hope and uncertainty. DeAndre nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I believe it's a step in the right direction," he replied. "But it's up to us to ensure that this is just the beginning of meaningful change." As we wrap up today's video, we'd love to hear from you. What have you learned from the story and the themes we've explored? Share one thing you've learned and how you plan to bring it into practice in your life by leaving a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more content to inspire and inform. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.